Today's special guest, we got a real treat for you. MSNBC and NBC News analyst David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida, has a lot to say. We make some predictions about the presidential race. We make some predictions about 2026. David Jolly, you don't want to miss it.
I'm more intrigued by a question. Would he drop out and consider a primary race against Rick Scott? Because I think he could beat Rick Scott in the U.S. Senate primary race.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida.
Welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. That's me, and I am super excited to have a special guest with us today. David Jolly, former congressman from Florida, who is, I'm sure you've seen him on television. He is an analyst with MSNBC and NBC News. Welcome to A Deeper Dive, David.
Hey, Dara, it's wonderful to be with you.
We had a little bit of technical issues, and David's been very patient with me this morning. So thank you. All right, so we were talking, we're talking, you are a former Republican congressman from Florida, from a what used to be a very competitive area of the state. I think it still is, Tampa Bay region.
That's right.
You switched parties. You caused a bit of a ruckus in Congress before you left. Tell us a little bit about what led up to your departure, not only from Congress, but also from the Republican Party.
Sure. So I was a lifelong Republican, but kind of in the model of Bush 41. And none of that really mattered in terms of creating conflict until I served, and particularly at a time when the party had just experienced the Tea Party wave and was coming into the Trump wave. I just simply was never a good enough Republican. So as a Republican member, someone who championed climate change and marriage equality and campaign finance reform and gun reform, all of those issues that just are taboo for Republicans, I was out of step. And then when the now former president, Donald Trump, emerged, I actually went to the House floor in 2015 and called on him to drop out of the race and never came around to support him. And that was really the beginning of the end. Sure, the party didn't want me, but I really didn't fit in the party any longer. So before the midterms in 2018, I registered as an NPA in Florida, no party affiliate. I've not yet joined the Democratic Party, but I've been really enjoying being untethered from kind of the major party constrictions, if you will, when it comes to having to sign up for every ideological loyalty test. I've really enjoyed being an independent, and I think Florida has a certain independent spirit to it, despite the way we sometimes see our elections perform.
Well, I wanted to ask you about there's so much to unpack there, and we didn't even get started on the questions I have. But what happened to the Republican Party? Is the MAGA base, is that the majority of Republicans nowadays? Because you were kind of never Trump before
Sure.
Never Trump was even a thing, and you were moderate by 2015 standards, which is you'd be considered to be a flaming liberal nowadays, right?
That's right.
But how did MAGA take over the GOP? Are they really the majority, or are they just the loudest?
Well, I do think they are the majority of the Republican Party, but understand by registrations, and this is nationally, you can translate it to Florida, the major parties only have registration numbers kind of in the high 20%. We see elections perform 50-50, but people who choose to identify with the Republican or Democratic Party, that's only about a little less than a third of the nation chooses each. And so, yes, of that coalition within the Republican Party, MAGA is the predominant coalition, and they are the controlling force, and that's the direction it's gone. I say ideologically it's gone from a less government party to a no government party to now government is the enemy. And that is now the platform that they have. I think that's wrong. I will tell you, yeah, I think both major parties have been on a similar journey, but arrived in different places. And what I mean by that is, if you really were to unpack how we got here, you can look at the emergence of big money, of big data, the ability to draw district lines and gerrymander and pack districts, and big media and new media and social media. And over the last 2 decades, it has allowed a reward system where kind of the furthest right or furthest left ideological voices get the rewards. I will tell you, though, the interesting departure from that is in the last 5 years, where Republicans have doubled down on that hard rider, angry populist movement, Democrats have put their family conversation to bed. We have not seen the circular firing squad that we saw, say, when the squad emerged, 16 into 18. We haven't seen the debate among Democrats, are we too moderate, are we too progressive? They have put that to bed and decided to unify. Republicans have not. That war continues, and that war has been won by the MAGA coalition.
Very small number, and kind of, again, because Florida is the center of the universe. Usually it's all about me, but right now it's about Florida, Florida, Florida with Congressman Matt Gaetz. I think you could, can we say that he single-handedly almost, with a faction, a very small number of supporters, was able to have the House Speaker McCarthy removed. And I think as we are recording this now, I believe that we are narrowly averting a partial government shutdown.
That's right.
So, I mean, how that is a very small fraction of a very small fraction of the Republican Party seems to have complete control over Congress right now.
Sure. Well, so I would say yes. Matt Gaetz single-handedly toppled the speaker. He turned out not to be the kingmaker, right? Jim Jordan did not get there. Right. Speaker Johnson did. Procedurally, you're right. Because of the way the rules work in the House, it was a very small group of kind of legislative arsonists that just wanted to blow the place up. But I don't think they are unique in their view of the world and unique in their ideological view. I think it was. They were unique in a willingness to just blow things up. But I would draw an analogy, frankly, to the former president, Donald Trump, and the party's embrace of him. The best explanation I've ever heard about the rise of Donald Trump came from a cab driver in D.C. who said to me, I voted for Donald Trump because I wanted someone to blow it up. I didn't expect he could put it back together, but we can have somebody else put it back together. And remarkably, that's actually what you're hearing from Nikki Haley now. That is her campaign message, that we needed Trump to blow it up, but I'll be the one to put it back together. Look, Matt Gaetz blew up the House. He couldn't put it back together, but yes, he single-handedly led the revolt that toppled Speaker McCarthy.
That's really interesting because I feel like we have had a series of leaders in Florida who like to call themselves disruptors. Richard Corcoran, a former House Speaker, is one. He's now the president of New College. And boy, are they doing some disruption over there at New College.
That's a generous term, Dara.
Yeah. Do you, you said, I love when I have a guest on and they answer my questions before I ask them. And you said, I think you indicated that you feel somewhat liberated by you being an NPA now. Do you get a lot of other Republicans whispering to you that they wished they could do what you do and speak openly and honestly about what's going on?
I did. Particularly in the early years of Trump, and some of the biggest names in Republican politics in the state of Florida were the ones to say to me, good for you, I wish I could do the same. And look, at the time, as someone who had just left public office after losing in a newly redistricted seat, so that comes with some, an emotional journey. and in part losing Republican support because I called out Donald Trump in my last race. I would often look at these Republicans and say, you know, forgive me, but screw you. Like, you can actually do exactly what I did. You're just choosing not to because you're a coward. And that was an era that lasted 2 or 3 years. I think what has happened, though, is Donald Trump and Trumpism and his surrogates, the Matt Gaetz of the world and others, have reshaped the party in their image to where there really are no detractors anymore. There are those who wish perhaps Donald Trump or Matt Gaetz didn't do the crazy things, but they're fine with this angry populist, burn down the government approach. They see that now as their ideology. So now there's been an embrace and a normalization of what was so disruptive 6 years ago that I really don't hear that anymore. I think if you are opposed to where the former president wants to take the party and has it today, then you're probably not a part of the party any longer.
How do you, we were talking a little bit beforehand, before we started recording. How do you govern then? I mean, government serves a function in society, right? So if your goal is to burn shit down, excuse me, but to burn down the house, then how does any governing take place?
You really don't. I mean, so let's take a few, not in the traditional sense. Let's take a couple of examples. We have seen over the course of this year in Congress a need to raise the debt ceiling, and we've now seen 2 different cycles of having to keep the government open. And though Republicans are the majority party in control, it has been Democrats who have provided a majority of the votes. Republicans have refused to actually tend to our debt ceiling, tend to keeping the government open. If you move to Florida at the state level, how do you govern? If you're Ron DeSantis, I think arguably you do it by trampling on the rights of the minority faction, the minority coalition. I don't mean that demographically, but you could probably apply it demographically. But the whole idea of the constitutional protections at the federal and state level are to protect the liberties and rights of the minority. Arguably, that is not what's happening under a DeSantis administration. He's trampling on the rights of those who are political adversaries and see the world differently than the governor does. So the answer is, how do you govern? Either you don't, or you do so in a way that tests the limits of the federal or state constitution.
And then you have courts. I mean, you stack, right. I'm using air quotes, the courts, which were the, with right. people who align with you ideologically. And so really there's no relief there for the minority.
That's right. And in the case in Florida, you would know better than I've just recently learned of the governor's efforts to call it gerrymander the state prosecutors' districts.
Yes.
To ensure that he can remove anyone who's not appropriately conservative in the prosecutorial roles.
Yes, I actually have been writing quite a bit about that, and interestingly, we'll see what the legislature does, but the committee that was appointed by Chief Justice Carlos Muniz at the request of Speaker Paul Renner, who is very close with Ron DeSantis, the committee made up of judges, clerks, and I think a couple lawyers. They recommended not making any changes to the state's judicial circuit. So we'll see what the legislature does with that. But the experts involved said, no, this is not a good idea. And by the way, of the thousands of comments that I read, all of them, and listened, no one publicly was advocating for that, or maybe just a handful of folks were advocating for some consolidation. But that's a whole nother conversation. But you brought up Governor Ron DeSantis. I want to get to him first. Before we get to Ron DeSantis, I want to ask you what you think of Speaker Johnson, and how long do you think he'll be Speaker?
Look, I put it this way. His runway is as short as Kevin McCarthy's, but McCarthy was at the end of the runway and Johnson's just getting started. So I think we have Speaker Johnson through the rest of this Congress. Republicans also don't really want to go through what they went through before.
Don't they?
I liken,
Don't they? They don't want to.
well,
I think they loved it. I think that the Gateses, the Gates eights, the crazy Gateses,
Sure.
whatever they were called. I think there was a certain amount of like lip smacking over that whole, no, yes, no, maybe, we're here late, what's going to
Sure.
happen, kind of the suspense.
I agree with you. I think they relished in it, but I will
Yeah.
tell you, in my opinion, it was a chapter, and this is why. I never thought Kevin McCarthy could secure the votes this past January. I didn't think he would become Speaker. I made a prediction he wouldn't be in Congress at the end of this session. He did. He proved me wrong, although my wife said, "You weren't wrong, you were just early," because the clock was ticking on McCarthy. They wanted him out. And so Gates and the Crazy Eight, they got him out. They don't want to do that going into an election year where they do want to focus on Joe Biden and House Democrats. And so I think Johnson's runway is long enough to survive this session. But as you rightly put, he just kept the government open by doing exactly what Kevin McCarthy did. And so how long is his honeymoon and grace period? We'll see. We're going to learn. But that will be the challenge for Speaker Johnson. I liken him to Mike Pence, to be honest, someone who wears his religiosity and his faith on his sleeve. And I think that will push the boundaries of some political conversations probably going into the next term. He needs to make some decisions about his leadership, and the nation will respond based on what they see.
It seems to be a little bit of a shift away from the libertarianism that we saw when the Tea Party, some of those same folks who are part of this coalition now, that appeared to be part of their shtick, but I maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
Well, I agree with you there, and I think there's an adjacent journey of our own governor who emerged during the Tea Party years as a libertarian,
Right.
not a social conservative, who then embraced angry populism of Donald Trump and what I call big government conservatism, and then finally landed in a very religiously conservative governing posture on many of the issues he's pursued in the state of Florida. People, I believe, mistakenly sometimes think of Governor DeSantis as an ideologue. I don't think so. I think he's very amorphous. I think he has changed his stripes several times in the last 12 to 15 years, depending on where the rewards within the party would find him.
You served in Congress with Governor DeSantis, correct?
I did when he was a Libertarian Freedom Caucus member.
And
Yes.
were you close to him? I mean, we've heard stories about
No.
What was that like?
He wasn't close to anybody. Look, he is a exceedingly reclusive person, almost antisocial. I would say a little bit arrogant, carries himself with a certain amount of arrogance. He had very few people he was close to. They were within the Freedom Caucus network, but he kept to himself and focused on raising money. And I will tell you what I always recognized in him, which, depending on your view of campaign finance, you could say as a compliment or an insult. He knew from the time he was a freshman member of Congress how to raise big money from the most conservative donors across the country. Remarkably, though, he was in a perfectly safe Republican seat in the Jacksonville area. So he did not need to raise money to get reelected in
Right.
Congress. He arrived a man in a hurry, looking to run for higher office and reach the national stage. And we're now seeing where that has led him.
That's draining the swamp. Learning from the get-go how to raise money. That whole draining the swamp thing, I find it so laughable when I hear, you know what I mean? Because it's very swampy.
It is exceedingly swampy. We ran for Senate against each other in 2016.
I know.
Rubio was running for president, said he'd never go back to the Senate. So DeSantis and I mixed it up a little bit in 16. I have the benefit of having led him for a year in that U.S. Senate race. So I might be a former member. He might be the next president, but I at least have a headline that says I led him. But we hit him pretty hard on the fundraising, because he would skip votes to go across the country raising money. And we even found this kind of phone video of him giving a speech, raising money and missing votes in Congress. And he said, the good news is I have all the money I need for this race. The bad news is it's in your pockets.
Wow.
And it just spoke to where his priorities were, but that is not unlike other very successful politicians.
We'll be right back with David Jolly.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. Yeah. He is an interesting cat. He has control of all three branches of government in Florida right now, which he is probably the most powerful governor. He's certainly the most powerful governor I've ever witnessed in my long, almost 30 years of doing this, David. So,
right.
I guess the question for you is, do you see a route for him to become president? He's trying not to, you can't diss Trump too hard as a candidate in this race. I guess this is what they seem to be doing, the candidates. I guess the strategy appears to be to knock everyone else out of the field so that you can emerge as the other guy in the race against DeSantis, meaning, try to topple Nikki Haley. How does the math work? Does the math work for DeSantis?
It does not appear to, but I will tell you, look, he has a very skilled and experienced team. And I think going into this, they knew they had 2 strategies. The underlying one was a delegate slog to actually win the precincts and to win the caucuses. The second one was a hope that somehow his net favorable and polling would overtake the former president. We weren't sure if the former president was going to run. I mean, Ron DeSantis basically had decided he was running and sent those signals before Donald Trump even did. And so I think there was a hope that his numbers would be greater than the former president's. There was even a brief period where it looked like it might be. It wasn't. So that goes to then the baseline strategy, which is a delegate slog. So for Ron DeSantis, it's Iowa or bust. I believe he has some strength in this, and the recent endorsement of Kim Reynolds, the highly popular Iowa governor, will be helpful. The polling numbers are still not there even in Iowa, but could he outperform the former president on caucus night? I don't think we can say no at this point. I don't expect him to, but that's his only strategy. That is all. Nikki Haley, I think, she's got a little bit longer to run on this one because she can make it to New Hampshire and then to South Carolina. If DeSantis loses Iowa, certainly if he loses badly, he's out. And, at this point, I don't think he would preemptively drop out, but I do think that has been considered, and if not, it should be.
It's fascinating to me because then what happens in Florida, in your home state? Do you want to come to Florida and have your name on the ballot? And, how do you fare against Trump in your home state where Trump is very popular?
Sure. I think he's out well before Florida. Look, every politician suffers from a certain vanity. Ron DeSantis by a pretty expansive one, I think we've seen. But every politician also knows if you can't win this thing, drop out before Florida. Frankly, we saw Jeb Bush do that, right? So I'm more intrigued by a question: would he drop out and consider a primary race against Rick Scott? Because I think he could beat Rick Scott in the U.S. Senate primary race. And understand when
wait, before you go further on that, which I have been predicting. I will say, I think I have predicted on the podcast. I do think that is something that the governor could consider doing. And I didn't mean to interrupt you because I want to hear the rest of your thought, but we know there is no love lost. That is putting it mildly, between Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis.
That's right. That's right. And Ron DeSantis and the First Lady are looking at 2 years of a lame duck where their power is receding. If they stay in Tallahassee, he could arguably beat Rick Scott and hold that Senate seat for a very long time. And if he decided to make another run for president, it is actually much easier to do it if he's in the U.S. Senate. I know the pathway from the Senate to the White House isn't a strong one, but the pathway from a former governor to Fox News host to the White House, that's even harder. You can ask Mike Huckabee about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, and you know this because you were the fundraising and the campaign financing was one of your big issues. You refused to take, I believe, right, to directly solicit
to raise money. I refuse to raise money.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I love that. Now that's swamp training. That's some swamp training.
I think we should. And here was the brief nickel on that. As a candidate, if you're not holding office, go for it. Raise all the money you want. We can still argue pay to play, and I would support saying take a candidate out of that process as well. But my point is, once you're elected and you're a sitting official with the public trust, I just think it's improper to be asking anyone for money. And then secondly, the truth is politicians spend half their time raising money and not governing. So give them their time back. Give the people, your elected officials, time back. It was called the STOP Act. I think
the STOP Act. That's right.
The sitting officials should stop raising money.
Yeah, the STOP Act. Well, there's a lot of stuff that we could apply that label to nowadays too, huh? I don't know the answer to this, but you maybe do. This is the question. I'm sorry, I was like Jesus turned the page there for a moment. Ron DeSantis has buckets of money in his campaign account, and so does Never Back Down. I think that's the name of it, right? So can that money be transferred over? Oh, I know.
It's all federal money.
Yeah.
Both his candidate committee, which is actually running out of money, but his candidate committee and the PAC are both federal dollars. So he could use those in a race against Rick Scott.
I know what I was like, I had a thought I wanted to share with you. I don't know if you're aware of this. You probably are. But there are lots of state legislators in the Florida Senate in particular who continue to raise money even when they're in their last year of their final term, which is like perplexing to me. I don't, and you look at some of these accounts, they have lots of money in them. So
when they lobby, they can give it out to people. Right. And look at Joe Manchin. He's raised a ton of money this term, knowing that he wouldn't be running again. Look, the entire system's corrupt. You and I were discussing part of my evolution away from the party is also an evolution in ideology as I got closer to the fire. And I will tell you, I've become a complete advocate of public financing of campaigns. We have one of the most corrupt campaign finance systems in the entire world, and we're pretending if we say otherwise.
Public financing of campaigns, not public financing of legal fees.
That's right. That's right.
You brought up Joe Manchin, and I again love when you beat me to the punch. I wanted to ask you about the impact of RFK and potentially Joe Manchin on the presidential race next year. What do you think? I mean, is that going to hurt President Biden's chances of reelection?
I think it certainly could. I mean, the interesting thing is they're two different figures. RFK arguably takes a little more from Republicans, a very anti-vaxxer, anti-establishment, anti-government candidate, much more in line with today's Republicans than Democrats. But a no labels campaign, for instance, that Joe Manchin does seem to take from Joe Biden. And look, when I left the Republican Party, I got very involved and still am in the no party community, and even helped launch or led a group into what is now a third party. The Forward Party is a recognized
Right.
party in Florida. But I will tell you what I did with that group. And it was myself, Christy Todd Whitman, the former Republican governor
Mm-hmm.
of New Jersey, and Andrew Yang, the former Democratic candidate. But the agreement was, if there is interest in starting a party, that means starting a party at the local level and doing the things required in 50 different states to build the infrastructure of a party. It does not mean running a presidential candidate. Running a presidential candidate is not third party building. That is simply a roll of the dice on an independent run like we saw from Ross Perot. And what we've learned is the conditions really are not there for someone to win that race.
Right.
So if the conditions are not there to win a presidential race, why are you doing it? And are you okay with the outcome of skewing the binary race between Republicans and Democrats in one direction or another? I think Joe Manchin needs to ask himself that. And I don't know how he would answer it. There is a purity of saying, look, I want to offer myself to voters. But are you okay with that producing the return of Donald Trump? Or are you okay with that reelecting Joe Biden? I think that needs to be considered, because the most likely outcome is you lose, but you do affect the outcome of the other race.
So is your purpose to help maybe not someone win, but someone lose?
Well, and I think those are fair questions. A lot of people have looked at the money behind no labels. I will tell you, I've spoken with them personally a year ago during our new party movement,
Right.
and I said, don't do it. I also will tell you it's a $70 million endeavor. We know that. It costs $70 million. And so many skeptics have asked, where are they getting their money from? And that's a fair question. And what's the motivation of the donors? Because do we really believe that an independent candidate can win this cycle? I, as an independent, would hope the answer is yes, but I have come to believe the answer is no.
No.
And so then we have to
I'm saying
look at
no.
what's
I'll
the
say
secondary
no.
outcome.
I'll say
That's
no.
right.
An independent can't win. I don't think an independent can win. Do you really think? I mean, yes, in an ideal world, wouldn't it be nice if an independent candidate could win? But I just don't believe they can under the kind of structure that we have now. And am I wrong about that, or?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, ballot access is a significant issue. Can you get on the ballot in all 50 states? The answer is it's even too late for no labels. It's too late for Dean Phillips challenging Joe Biden right now. So there are structural challenges. There are financial challenges, right? 70 million gets you on the ballot. That's not a single dollar spent on running a race when we're looking at $1 billion presidential race. The only way I see it ever happening is such a captivating and compelling figure that can win hearts and minds, that it is a cultural movement. There is not a cultural movement behind Joe Manchin or Mitt Romney or any other independent candidate right now. And so the question is, who do you believe is the person that can make democracy strongest, who can best protect the American experiment, who can provide for an economy and education and healthcare for all people? Do you think that's Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Because you should be working for the candidate that you believe answers that question.
I think in some ways, I haven't really thought about this before, but in some ways, that's kind of what Donald Trump did to the Republican Party. He kind of created a third party, because he is that kind of charismatic leader that there are people who I've spoken to, people, the cable guy who comes to my house as an example, people that I just meet on the street as I'm out and about. They are enamored of him in a way that is almost dear leader-ish, I mean, it is almost a cult-like following. And I say that not to be snarky, but it is, they are not persuadable by facts that are being presented in courts and by judges and prosecutors like that. They just don't buy it. It's kind of a faith thing to me almost,
So I agree with you. I think Donald Trump launched a cultural movement and parked it in the Republican Party.
Right.
And understand, he considered running as the Reform Party nominee in 2000, Ross Perot's party, and realized that he couldn't win then. And then when he was considering running in 16, for 2 years, people were wondering, is he going to run? But what party will he choose? And that's where it just affirms that Donald Trump knew he was going to launch a movement, and he chose to park it in the Republican Party. If the Democratic Party had been more ripe, he would have parked it there. But it's an example, and it should be a lesson for the likes of Manchin, which is you need the infrastructure of a major party, if for no other reason than for how our election laws are currently written. I wish that wasn't the case. Look, where the Forward Party ended up. Now, I never actually was able to join it because of my NBC affiliation. I couldn't participate in party building. But where we ultimately ended up was, let's register at the state level, begin to win city council races and mayorships and others, which we've done in the state of Florida. But let's work on changing election laws. For instance, in the state of Florida, you can become a minor party really within a matter of months. It takes a few signatures and some bylaws. But that doesn't matter because the major parties lock you out of campaign finance benefits. And so within each state, you have to address the institutional challenges that the major parties have put into place. That's hard work that takes a generation to build a viable, durable third party. That's not the Manchin no label saying. This is a vanity exercise that's doomed to lose.
My last question, I could talk to you you're going to promise to come back on, right? And so
I'd love to come back on.
So who's going to win? Who's going to be the next president?
I'm terrified that my gut's telling me Donald Trump is. I say that personally. I know listeners can have their own opinion.
No, me too.
But I would also say, don't count out Joe Biden, and don't count out the American voters that since 2018 have shown up to say Trumpism is just too much for me. Because we have seen the American voter, not Democrats, we've seen American voters defy polls and defy predictions and side with the pro-democracy agenda of Joe Biden. I do worry, just for the country, on two issues. I think the economy is the complete wild card and probably going in the wrong direction if you support Joe Biden's reelection. We can have numbers that support it. We can have numbers that say it's bad. But as I sat with a contractor at our house yesterday, we both agreed in your gut, the economy is just not strong. And then secondly, what does it mean for our culture to go through this next race when the former president is asking to return to office for retribution? And he is seeking to absolve himself of criminal allegations by using the political system, not the courts. That gets us in a very tough spot as a nation, particularly when our own law enforcement agencies are telling us that political violence is on the rise and that the threat domestically is on the rise to rogue political actors. We are resilient enough to get through this as a nation, but only if we are determined enough to do that. I hope we are, but I do worry.
We worry about what 4 years of a Donald Trump that you described would have on our system. I'm hesitating. Right. I don't want to say like it's the demise of the Republican democracy. I don't want to overstate it, but it's a fearful proposition for a lot of people.
Yeah, I find myself in a circular conversation in my own head, and occasionally at dinners we'll ask this question, and I would leave it with you perhaps, which is the circular conversation is this. Are we right to present this as an existential moment where democracy is on the line? In many ways, I think so. And I think there are flashing red lights signaling we need to be worried. But if we say it is an existential moment, then we are dismissing the resiliency of America as the experiment that has survived for so long under really incredible threats in really hard times. So are we that resilient nation with a constitution that will keep us through some of these great challenges? Or are we at the brink of losing it? I don't know the answer to that. I fear that we are at the brink, but I also want to believe that we're resilient enough as a nation. And I also believe that we are. but it's a very circular conversation
Yeah.
in my own head and one we could have
Yeah,
together.
absolutely. Next time we're in person, we will have to explore that. The last thing I want to ask you is, what can, if anything, can Democrats in Florida do to attract former Republicans or moderate Republicans like yourself? Is there anything, or is the Democratic Party in Florida just kaput?
I think there are some things, but I also think it requires people like myself to ally with them and not wait for Democrats to come your way. Meet them halfway. I have a bit of a project in the works that that I'll get into more detail maybe after the turn of the calendar year. But I think it's possible to build a coalition that believes in a Florida for all, and that can be adjacent to or within today's Florida Democratic Party, to recognize that on matters of education and the economy and the environment, that we need to bring Tallahassee back from the brink, and that there is a coalition that wants to do that. Understand, DeSantis won by 19 points in 2022.
Yep.
We're going to learn in the Rick Scott race if that was an outlier, because before this last cycle, it was 2006 the last time a Republican won more than 50% of the vote for governor.
Mm-hmm.
And I still believe that there are enough people in the state that want to bring us back from the brink. I think we're a right of center state still. So what can the Florida Democratic Party do? It needs to remain the opposition party in infrastructure, but I think it can look and feel different in a state where Republicans continue to win. Let's build a Florida for all on critical issues that matter to Floridians, and I think we can get there. I think the 26 race will be very telling. If the Democrats go into it just putting up the next person off the bench, we're not going to expect any different results. But I think there's an opportunity to build a coalition before 26 that brings in industry leaders, business leaders, faith leaders, community leaders who are apolitical, but simply know that on issues of book ban and personal decisions on healthcare, on matters of voter suppression, on education, and on economy, that they're not seeing themselves in Tallahassee, and they want to. I think we can deliver that coalition in 26.
Well, David Jolly, you will be back on the show, I am predicting, after the turn of the calendar year to tell us all about your Florida for All project. I get a pinky swear on that?
I will join you. I look forward to it.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I can't wait to chat again.
You got it. Thank you, Darren. Very much appreciated.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.